the radical, fundamental principles of freedom, rational self-interest, and individual rights. This is the Yaron Brook Show.
All right, everybody, welcome to Yaron Brook Show on this May 15th. I hope everybody's having a fantastic week and that you continue to do so. Thank you for joining us. Thank you, John and Remo, for getting us started here with Superchat. And Remo has a 60 euro question, so thank you for getting us started in that way. Today, as I think most of these shows will be, we will go until we run out of topics to talk about. Well, up until 3 hours. We won't go over 3 hours. But that is the goal. Please let people know on Twitter that we are on live right now, and we're going to be talking about the news and all kinds of fun stuff regarding the news and regarding the second portion of the show, or the third portion of the show, will be a discussion of trade. Trade, baby, trade. There's so much in the news about this. There's so much ignorance and so much, might I say, stupidity with regard to this issue that I'm going to talk about it. I've talked about it in the past, and I will talk about it a lot more in the future. So this is just going to be with us as one of the great economic fallacies, one of the great fallacies that exists out there in the world. And it's just something that I'm passionate about. We'll keep talking about it. So we'll talk about that in the third section of today's show. I'm curious and appreciate, so before we get to that, so we're going to talk about inflation. We're going to talk about some other crazy regulatory stuff that's going on. We'll talk about the big bailout that's happening in China, or about to start in China. We will talk a little bit about immigration, some new stuff coming out on immigration. We'll talk about, that's a cool story about Lloyd Wright. And then, we'll start probably with a couple of foreign policy stories, quick ones. Let's see. I'm curious what you guys think about, if I list, I used to list the topics that I'm going to talk about from the news side. If I list a few topics, will that make it more attractive? Will that get people more excited about joining us for the news segment if they know I'm going to talk about this, that, or the other? I'm just curious if anybody in the chat wants to comment on that. Please feel free to do so. All right. What is this? Let me just... All right. We've got all this up here. All right, cool. All right. So Alex says, just because it's a response to my question I just asked, I'm going to go with it. Alex says, feedback on the format. I mostly listen offline and prefer the new one. Great, especially when the long topic integrates well with the daily news. But I would miss the topics that don't fit, like the one about peace with the Saudis. I don't remember the one about peace with the Saudis, but I don't know. Like yesterday, it didn't fit with the news, right? Because yesterday, what was the big topic yesterday? I can't even remember, but it was not fitting with the news. So I don't know how to do that, and I don't want all the big topics to be newsy topics. I don't want every single a long topic to be a newsy topic. I want, like I did a topic on Friday. We did, we did the topic on honesty, and that's not going to fit in the news, right? So that's the challenge. The challenge is how to include topics that are not going to be newsy, long format. Today's kind of newsy because it's about trade, economics, and news. So that's the challenge. Thanks, Alex, for the feedback. But I'm glad you like the new format, and we'll keep going. All right, some quick updates, kind of breaking news, if you will. The Prime Minister of the Slovak Republic, for those of you who are a bit challenged with geography, is the southeast part of Czechoslovakia, which split into two, if you remember, after the fall of the Berlin Wall and after a few years trying to get along. The Czechs and the Slovaks decided, and in spite of the fact that they speak a very similar language, in spite of the fact that culturally they're very similar, in spite of the fact that there are many, many similarities between them, they would rather each create their own state. Czechoslovakia split into the Czech Republic and the Slovak Republic. Anyway, the Czech Republic is richer, more advanced. The Slovak is poorer. But anyway, they're two independent countries. Slovakia has become has just had an election a few months ago, and there was a real shift to, I guess you could call it the right, but it was a shift towards kind of a candidate and a political party, the relatively anti-Europe, a candidate political party that was supporting Ukraine, pro-Russia, right? So the candidate who won and became prime minister a few months ago was a candidate who is pro-Russia. He's been a prime minister in the past. He then lost that position, and now he's back as prime minister. Anyway, today he was actually there was an assassination attempt on his life. He was shot in a town not near a major city. There's only one major city in Slovakia, which is Bratislava. He was shot somewhere in a small town outside of there. He was shot, I think, 4 times, so critically injured. He was airlifted from this town to a university hospital somewhere, again, not in Bratislava, but somewhere, I guess, a little bit more major than the town in which he was shot. And was, last time I checked, which was about an hour ago, was undergoing critical surgery. His life was in danger. I mean, they're trying to get the 4 bullets out and to patch him up and to see if any internal organs were damaged. Not clear exactly what the outcome will be. Not clear exactly what will happen there. But the Prime Minister of Slovakia was shot today. Now, why was he shot? Of course, we don't know, and I warn you, like everything regarding breaking news, there's always the fog of war, even if there's no war. Breaking news is always in the fog, in some kind of fog of war. But in this case, what we do know is that the shooter, who was immediately apprehended on the scene, appears to be a poet, and a activist with the political party that governed Slovakia before the last election. Seems to be active politically, but probably somebody who is very antagonistic to kind of the right, probably somebody who's very antagonistic to kind of the nationalism and the pro-Putin. And another big influence in Slovakia is the neighboring country of Hungary and Orban. So the attempted assassin is an anti-Orban, anti-Putin. I don't know how leftist he is. We don't know, but supposedly his profession is some kind of poet and political activist. So that is out there. That is happening right now, and we'll find out whether he lives or not, I guess, in the next few hours. The leader of Slovakia that was just shot, his name is Robert Fico, F-I-C-O. Not a particularly sympathetic character, I have to say. Not somebody I like, not somebody I was rooting for in the election. Again, very sympathetic to Putin, and anti-Ukraine, so not one of my favorites. But still, you don't want to see in our Western world, you don't want to see political change being affected through violence and assassination. I have to say, Zelensky put out, the president of Ukraine, put out, I thought, a very good statement. basically condemning the attack, even though Robert Fico is an antagonist of Zelensky, condemning the attack and wishing Fico a recovery, a quick recovery. But one of the real scary things in our crazy political world today is that this starts to descend, this right-left vicious hatred descends into political violence. So far we haven't really seen that on scale. The 1960s in the United States, for example, were a lot worse. Assassination of a president, assassination of a president's brother, running for president, assassination of Martin Luther King. I mean, we saw assassination of Malcolm X. We saw a number of assassinations of very, very prominent, visible people. You're just not seeing that today, which is good. And let's hope it stays that way. And Slovakia, which is in Eastern Europe but part of the West, let's hope this is an aberration. Talking about misguided leaders of countries, Erdogan, who is the president of Turkey, is just sinking lower and lower. Erdogan is a Islamist. He's not I guess, crazy global jihad tomorrow Islamist. He is an Islamist who believes he's very sympathetic to the Muslim Brotherhood, very influenced by the Muslim Brotherhood, and he believes that the way in which to impose Islam on the world is just give it time. It's come in with a suit and tie, look like a Westerner, look like a liberal in the positive sense, and bring in your agenda through the back door without anybody noticing. And he's done that in Turkey, and Turkey has moved radically far towards religion, even though its population, big chunks of the population, are not religious. Turkey's become a much more religious state over time. It used to have a very, very strong secular underpinning that was basically guaranteed in its constitution by the military. Well, that is gone. That secular commitment is gone, and Erdogan has made it much more. And as a consequence, Erdogan is also much more sympathetic and much more supportive of the more radical Islamist forces in the Middle East, starting with the Muslim Brotherhood all the way down to Hamas, for example, and has become, over the years, far more antagonistic towards Israel. Now, there was a time where I don't know, 5, 6, 7 years ago, where Israel and Turkey were very antagonistic towards the other, and Erdogan has distanced himself from Israel as much as he could. And then there was a warming of relationships not that long ago. I think Erdogan realizing strategically that the real power in the Middle East was Israel, and that if he wanted to become kind of the Muslim power, he needed to be on decent relations. That's where the technology was. That's the strongest military, and that Israel is the country most aligned with NATO. And after all, Turkey is a member, unbelievably, of NATO. Well, that has shifted since October 7th. Erdogan has taken a strong anti-Israel, pro-Hamas stance, and has shifted attitudes and become one of the most vocal leaders in the world in his opposition to everything Israel is doing, even more vocally opposed than many of the Arab countries. I guess yesterday or today, he said that basically you can't trust Israel. You don't know what Israel is going to do. You quote, "Don't assume that Israel will stop in Gaza. If not stop, this rogue state, this terrorist state, will sooner or later set its sights on Turkey with its delusion about a promised land." So this is a lot of projection. Erdogan is projecting the desire for empire, which he has. He'd love to reestablish the Ottoman Empire, onto Israel. But imagine the idea of Israel, this tiny little country. I don't know what the population of Turkey is, but Turkey has a large population. Oops, I can't spell. Population Turkey. Turkey has a population of 85 million people. Israel has a population of, 8 million, 9 million. The idea that Israel is going to, and that's just Turkey. On the way to Turkey, Israel would have to invade Lebanon and Syria and would have to occupy them. Maybe you should throw in Egypt with 100 million people in. This idea that a small country like Israel it has ambitions to be an empire over tens of millions of Muslims, that is bizarre and strange and weird. And if you take it, particularly if you think about Israel that has fought many wars over the last 75 years, but all of them, and I challenge anybody to show me otherwise, all of them mean defensive wars. And when it has taken territory, like the Sinai Desert from the Egyptians, as soon as there was real effort towards peace, it was quite willing to give it up and return it. Israel has had really no significant territorial ambitions. Now, ultimately, yes, many Israelis would like to keep the West Bank. But if you look geographically, that's an integral part of what is Israel. And many Israelis are quite happy to establish a Palestinian state there, so this is not something uniform within Israel. But the idea, it's a bit of a joke that the idea that Israel would go after Turkey and try to establish an empire over Turkey, it really is ludicrous. But this is the kind of bizarre conspiracy theory, anti-Semitic nonsense that so many people out there in the world actually hold and actually believe and actually support. So all of that is, So anyway, that's Turkey, NATO member, accusing Israel of wanting to go to war ultimately with Turkey and establish an empire. Pretty bizarre, pretty bizarre. But this is the direction that OCON has taken. All right, let's see. I think that's the only foreign policy story I have. All right, news coming out of a lot of the market. I think the market today was kind of holding its breath, really holding its breath because inflation numbers were coming out, and I think as we have followed here, the inflation reports that have been coming out over the last few months, there's been a lot of angst about the fact that inflation is not dropping as fast as people anticipated, that inflation kind of has become sticky, it's static. There was significant fears that inflation would increase. And all of this important not only because inflation sucks in the sense that inflation raises our cost of living, it makes everything more expensive, it lowers our standard of living. So people are worried about inflation in and of itself. But it is also true that inflation, the existence of inflation causes the Federal Reserve, to keep interest rates high. Keeping interest rates high means you pay more for your mortgage, more for your car loan, you're paying more for any debt that you take. It also means companies are taking on less debt and therefore using less debt in order to expand operations. So usually higher interest rates have an economic drag. They usually are slowing down the economy, slowing down economic growth, slowing down investment, and they are deemed negative. And of course, they again cause us to have a lower standard of living, everything else held constant, because we're paying more on our mortgage or things like that. Or if we have a fixed rate mortgage at a very low rate, it provides us a disincentive from selling our home, right? Even if I wanted to move, I'm not going to sell my house. I have a real cheap mortgage. If I got a new mortgage on a new home somewhere else, that would be a lot more expensive. It limits that kind of mobility. So inflation is really, really bad for a lot of reasons. And as I've told you in the past, high interest rates, everything else held constant again, high interest rates means lower values of assets. The higher the interest rate, the lower values of assets. Home prices should be down if you listen to my interview with Bryan Kaplan the other day, you know that home prices are high, not because of interest rates, not because of inflation. Home prices are high primarily, dominantly, because of regulations that constrain supply, that limits supply of housing. So demand and supply mismatch, and regulation that makes it impossible for the supply to catch up with the demand. So I'm just noticing, I think, for the first time, that you can actually like questions. Has that always been there? And you can comment on a question. Can you comment on a question? I'm just checking this out. See, yeah, you can actually comment on a question. You can, I guess, reply. I can, at least. I don't know if you guys can. And you can like questions. So you can actually go in and like the questions. That's kind of cool. So you can upvote questions. So we could actually have like a little competition. Who gets the questions upvoted the most and stuff like that. Maybe that helps. Anyway, cool. I don't know why I only noticed it now. Is it a new feature or has it always been? I think it's new. All right. YouTube keeps improving. Superchat. I like that. All right. What were we talking about? Inflation. So inflation, interest rates high, asset prices low, interest rates high, stock market go down, everything else held constant, which it never is. So anyway, everybody's kind of holding their breath because the anticipation is that the Federal Reserve will lower interest rates if inflation stabilizes or goes down. And today, inflation numbers were reported, and I think everybody sighed a bit of a sigh of relief. Inflation is not going up. That is the good news, right? Inflation over the last 12 months has been 3.4%, which is significantly higher than where the Fed wants it to be, which is 2%, which is basically means that they're not lowering interest rates anytime soon. But I think there was real fear that it would go up, that it would be more than 3.4%. So generally the markets viewed this as positive. I hate to attribute any particular thing to a particular movement in asset prices, but stocks did go up today by over 1%. Probably in response to the inflation number. They were probably holding back in anticipation of what would happen with inflation. And now they're starting to price in, okay, the Fed won't lower interest rates anytime soon, but now the probability that they'll lower interest rate in 6 months is much higher than it was yesterday. And what does that do to stock prices? That's kind of how people think about these things. Core inflation, which takes out food and takes out energy, has gone up 3.6%, which just shows you that food and energy, at least as a combination, have gone up less than everything else. So that's the news. Inflation seems to be stabilizing around 3%, higher than what the Fed wants, but I don't think it'll increase interest rates to respond to this. They'll just keep interest rates relatively high, which is what they are today, and let it play out and hope that over time the higher inflation, the higher interest rates have an impact on inflation. Higher interest rates. The idea is higher interest rates because they slow economic activity, reduce in a sense reduce the amount of demand in the economy. And allow the supply to catch up, so that you get a balance between the amount of money spending, the amount of money chasing the goods. Higher interest rates in some ways sucks money out of the economy. That's the thinking anyway. Whether that's true or not is one of those great open questions in economics. But that's the perception. I agree with John Cochrane, the economist, in saying that I do not think you will actually get rid of this slightly higher inflation unless somebody in Washington gets serious about the deficit. I really think that this inflation, a lot of it has to do with expected inflation, and that has a lot to do with the fact that people are looking at the debt, looking at our deficits and saying, the government can never pay this back. There's not enough money in the world for it. How's the government ever going to pay this back? The only way the government can pay this back is they inflate it away. And they're saying, okay, maybe there's not a lot of inflation this year or next year or the year after that. But at some point there has to be, because it's the only way the government can pay it back unless they default. And they price it in advance. So I think until Congress gets serious about the deficit, which is likely not to happen in the next 5 years, we are likely to have higher than expected inflation rates. That's my prediction in economics, but of course, I've been wrong quite often in the last few years about these things. And going back many, many years, I'm not a very good predictor of macroeconomic trends or of presidential election outcomes. Not very good in either one of those. All right, that is the inflation situation in America today. Stable, but higher than what the Fed would like, higher than what any of us would like, certainly, but even higher than what the Federal Reserve itself would like. Prices of gas are not driven primarily by inflation. Prices of gasoline are primarily, so here's the thing. When we talk about inflation, or CPI, price inflation, when we talk about price inflation, what do we mean? We mean a systemic rise in prices. We mean prices rising across the board. On any given day, some prices going up and another prices going down. Gas prices could go up 100% and inflation could be zero. Because, gas prices, there could be a war in the Middle East that basically shuts down oil production by the Saudis and the Gulf states. And as a consequence of that, prices of oil go through the roof, which would translate in higher gasoline prices. And that has nothing to do with inflation. Because all that will happen there is, if we spend more money on gas, what happens then? We spend less money on other things. We still have the same amount of money. Same amount of money chasing the goods, but we have a lot less money after we pay for gasoline to chase around all the other goods, so some of those are going to have to either go down or to zero. They're going to go out of business. So overall inflation is not going to change. That's relative price changes. Relative price changes change all the time and do not reflect inflation per se. It is the change in the amount of money we have to demand goods, which drives prices overall up. Or somehow there's a systemic shock to the supply chain that restricts the availability of goods overall, would cause prices to go up generally. But most price inflation is caused by a shock to the demand. That is helicopter money. What happened over COVID? We all got checks in the mail. We all suddenly had money that didn't come from producing anything. It just came out of thin air. We didn't have money because we produced more. If you have more money because you produced more, that's called wealth creation, then there's no inflation because, yes, you have more money to spend, but there's also more stuff because the only way you got the money is by producing more stuff. Price inflation happens when you have more money, but you didn't produce more stuff. Or in the case of COVID, you produced less stuff because you were locked home. So that produces price inflation. So gasoline prices could very well be going up right now, but that could be caused by a bunch of different things. Partially it depends on what state you're in. In California right now, they're switching from a winter blend to a summer blend, and only certain refineries can make summer blends, which makes gas prices go up beyond what they should because of regulations in California. When they don't go up in other states, if it's going up all over the country, that probably means that the global price of oil has gone up, and that could be affected by all kinds of issues related to geopolitics, related to just the supply of oil and the demand of oil in this particular point in time. All right. Let's see. So one of the big complaints people have in our economy, particularly, I don't know, parents and people in the middle class and a lot of educated people, but just generally people with kids. Generally, people with kids, a lot of their complaints is that childcare is really, really expensive, and it just costs a lot of money to get good help, particularly when it relates to children, right? And of course, this is one of those problems that is like a lot of things that seem that are expensive, and you can't quite figure out why they're so expensive. One of the ways in which to make these a lot cheaper, childcare a lot cheaper, as Scott Lincecum points out, is basically to deregulate them. Because the reality is that right now, to get childcare, you have to get licensed. You have to have a particular staff per child ratio of home-based care regulations. There's a million ways in which these things are regulated and concerned, and it's expensive because a big chunk of the expense is to pay for regulation. Regulations generally make everything more expensive. So here's the thing going on in D.C. Washington, D.C. is now going to require daycare teachers to have college degrees so that they're better equipped to help kids escape poverty or educate kids. I mean, I think it works the other way around. I think if you have a college degree, you're less equipped to help kids generally, period. Certainly help kids escape from poverty. I think a college degree, I don't think it makes you more qualified. Might be the other way around. So they're going to make it harder for daycare centers. They're going to have to pay teachers more, and parents, particularly poor parents, of which there are a lot in Washington, D.C., it's a fairly poor city, are going to have a harder time affording their daycare or sending their kids to daycare at all. And instead they'll use family or whatever. Or maybe one parent will stay home, and maybe it's cheap at that point to go on welfare. There are a lot of other solutions which are going to only do damage. And it's stunning that price of education goes like this. Not just college. All forms of education are going up like that because of the level, the degree to which government is regulating all forms of education. And I like this comment by Scott. He says, so this is what D.C. is trying to do, pass regulation that will have only college degree graduates teaching daycare. This is where we're at. This is what Scott writes. Adding insult to injury, congressional staffers living in D.C. with kids and relatively low salaries will think, wow, childcare is a market failure. It's obviously a market failure because it's so expensive. People can't afford to do it. And the federal government really does need to regulate, subsidize it even more. And that's exactly right. That's exactly what happens. The government puts in a plan. Something goes wrong. Whatever happened is blamed on markets, and we have more regulations. And 5-10 years later, those new regulations called a crisis, which is then blamed on market failure, and we have even more regulations, and on and on and on it goes, and it never stops. It never stops. Yeah. This is Scott Lincecum, and if you don't follow Scott Lincecum, you should. Scott Lincecum is one of the best I'd say, policy guys out there in terms of economists who talk about policy stuff, not theory, but policy, regulations, tariffs, controls, what to do about them. He's really good. He's really smart. He's got a very good Twitter account. I encourage you all to, follow. Yeah. So that is the process by which regulation just blows up in your face. It just becomes worse and worse. Not sure what that is about. We'll get to that in a minute. All right. I mean, reports are now, you're getting a bunch of conflicting reports. Some reports saying that the Prime Minister of the Slovakian Prime Minister is awake and awake in hospital, and others saying he's still unconscious and undergoing surgery. So extremely serious, and situation is very bad. So really very, very difficult to say what is actually going on and what his condition actually is as we speak. All right, Mary Benz says, childcare, regarding childcare, she says, I bitterly regret not having more beautiful, brilliant children because I can't afford to give them the education they deserve. Yeah, I mean, I think that's part of the issue about declining birth rates is that parents at least believe, whether true or not, that it's way, it's just so expensive they can't afford it. There is some counter evidence of that, but certainly parents do believe that they just can't properly educate their kids given the cost of childcare and the cost of schooling. It's pretty sad. All right, so I think we've talked, it's been a while since we talked about this, but there was a while in which we talked a lot about the real estate crisis in China and the fact that in China, they've got all these massive quantities of apartment buildings, condominium buildings, that either haven't been completed or been completed, but haven't been, the price of the property is plummeted. A lot of these apartments were bought by naive or ignorant Chinese investors, call it, thinking that price of housing only goes up. Anybody out there believe that as well? Anyway, Chinese people thinking that the price of housing can only go up, and people buying more and more houses, and some Chinese families that weren't that wealthy owning several homes and getting on mortgages on them, and which they can't afford, and just a complete and utter real estate disaster, which is what's unfolding in China. Of course, we've talked about the fact that a number of China's largest real estate developers in the residential space are basically bankrupt. They're defaulting on bonds like crazy. So there is a real, not a small, a real massive crisis in real estate in China, and there are a lot of vacant properties that nobody right now wants to buy because prices are dropping like a rock, and nobody has the resource to buy, and people might have bought it a long time ago and now desperately need the money to get out of it. So the Chinese government has come up with a scheme to kind of try to do a bailout, and you could bail out the developers. But what they're thinking of doing is basically the Chinese government is going to buy unsold homes. Unsold housing inventory is about 3.6 billion square feet, right? And it's the highest it's been since until 2016. And it's going to cost 7 trillion yuan, 78% of China's budget deficit this year, for the government to absorb the inventory in 18 months, but they are going to try. The new plan to enlist local governments to reduce housing glut is going to make local government debt even worse. As you know, I've talked about the fact that local governments in China have massive amounts of debt that nobody knows how they're going to handle. Well, now the central government of China is going to force them to take on a lot more debt in order to buy even more of these houses. But basically, the idea is take these houses off the market, get money into the hands of the people who own these houses, and hopefully by taking them off the market and getting people money, you create some consumption and some investment and some economic growth out of it. As it is, local government's debt is 56% of gross domestic product, which is enormous. Banks are under enormous pressure. A lot of bad loans, a lot of really, really bad debt, which the Chinese government probably is not recognizing. Anyway, more evidence that China is in real economic malaise, real economic problem. And, and the fact is that China is adopting Western solutions, which means bailouts. China is trying to bail out bad investment decisions by its state governments, local governments, and by real estate developers. Instead of letting the real estate developers go bankrupt and basically abandoning these properties or selling them to the highest bidder, whatever the prices be, the Chinese government is going to print up some money and going to go out there and spend it buying these homes. Nothing good can counter this. I mean, I guess, again, it takes the inventory off the market and it maybe rejuvenates economic activity a little bit. But it also, creates all kinds of rotten incentives and, requires massive, ultimately, this says that people can be bailed out and the downside risk can be capped. This is incredible moral hazard. It also places massive amounts of debt on the local government balance sheet, which at some point somebody is going to have to deal with. And it's that point, China might have to inflate dramatically. Whether it inflates one way or another, that inflation again will cause real economic problems. So the Chinese economy not doing well. Not doing well, I guess that is not that surprising. All right, there's a new report out about the immigration to the United States, basically saying that the foreign-born population in the United States grew over the last 2 years, by 5.1 million people. I mean, if that is true, that is the largest 2-year increase in terms of absolute numbers, the largest 2-year increase in all of recorded history. As of March, again, to the extent that we trust these numbers, 51.6 million foreign-born residents of the United States will be living in the U.S., which is 15.6% of the total U.S. population. And that, too, is, if not the highest, certainly very close to the highest percentage of the U.S. population born overseas ever in history. And that is surprising. It will make it higher than the percentage born overseas in the early 20th century when immigration was massive and the American population was not that big. So immigration has been sizable, not very rationally, not very meaningful in a sense of who's immigrating and what and how we measure it and who's coming in, but it is unbelievably sizable. Since Biden took office in January 2021, foreign-born population has increased by 6.6 million in 39 months. It sounds like almost all of that was in the last 2 years. So from March 2022 to March 2024, in the first year, there wasn't that much. In the first year of Biden's presidency, it's mostly in the last 2 years. This is saying that if present trends continue, foreign-born population will reach 82 million by 2040. And this is one of the bullet points. I find this interesting, right? This is, by the way, an anti-immigration website is publishing these stats. Many observers think of immigrants solely as workers, but only 46% of foreign-born workers, foreign-born who arrived in 2022 or later were employed in the first part of 2024. Similar to the share of new arrivals employed during, it's similar to the share of new arrivals employed during previous economic expansions. So isn't it shocking? 46%, only 46% of people, arriving in the United States, immigrating to the United States, are employed over the last 2 years. And that made the headlines. So that is what astounding. If you look at the headlines, particularly of kind of right of center publications, a new report shows over half of immigrants in America are unemployed. Report, more than half of immigrants in U.S. are unemployed. Just 46% of new immigrants are working, census data show. Over half of illegal aliens, I'm not sure where the illegal came in the United States are unemployed. That's not even true in terms of the illegal. I don't know what publication that is. Anyway, those are the headlines. But anybody want to think about why 46%, why that number 46, and why the report, again, by a anti-immigration group generally, why the report says that this number is similar to the share of new arrivals employed during previous economic expansions. Why is 46 not a low number? What do you think could cause that? 46% of all new immigrants are employed. Anybody want to take a jab at why that is the case? I'm waiting. Yeah, Alex says kids. Yeah, a big part of it. A lot of the immigrants are families. Indeed, one of the things that makes the immigration of the last 2 years unique is, including the illegal immigration, is the number of families that have been coming. Because they are escaping tyrannical regimes like the one in Venezuela. They're escaping horrible living conditions like, were in El Salvador or in Guatemala and other places. And they're coming as whole families. So kids, half of these immigrants are, well, not half maybe, but a third or more of the immigrants are kids. And yeah, they're not working, but that doesn't mean they're unemployed. Who else? Who else? Well, a lot of the women who come are taking care of the kids. They're homemakers. They're not looking for work. We still live in a country where households with one salary can still make a living better than in most of the countries they're coming from. So a lot of the women are not looking for work. So 46% of all immigrants working is normal. That's the rate. That's the rate it's at. But you see how you read newspaper articles, you read headlines, you read tweets, you read what people say, and you can be completely deceived about what is actually going on. A headline saying only 46% of immigrants, or no, over half of immigrants unemployed. That sounds horrible. It means everybody's on the dole. They must be all getting welfare. And of course, that is absolutely not the case. It's the case that unemployment among immigrants, that is, the number of people employed who want to work, who have the ability to work, is much lower than of native-borns. Or maybe not much lower these days because unemployment's so low, but it's the same or lower. They come here to work. I know that's unimaginable for so many people. Whoops, shouldn't have done that. All right. just thought you'd appreciate kind of the angle. All right, this is kind of cool story. I really, this was exciting and fun. You know, let me see. I'm going to see if I can share. We're going to do this. I'm going to see if I can share a photo, because I think the photo is, yeah, there's the photo. Can you guys see that? I think you can. Now, that is a cool looking home. That is a cool looking home. It's the exact opposite of the kind of houses that I constantly complain about. The McMansions that you see in Dallas and you see in California and you see in Denver and you see everywhere you drive around, and they all look the same and they're all ugly. And in California, they have little windows even when they have a great view, because they build them in a style of Tuscany. A Tuscany. So they have little windows. This is a beautiful home. It's filled with light. It's got big windows. It's got that beautiful indoor-outdoor feel to it. It's not a square. It's got cantilevers that are breaking the square. This is a beautiful house. And what's interesting about this house is that whoops, I don't want to do that. Leave it there. All right. Well, we're gonna move away from the picture. Is that this house is basically a house that is based on a design by Frank Lloyd Wright. It turns out that there is a company called Lindal, Lindal. It's a company established in Canada, but now is based in Seattle. And basically what they do is they sell kits. They sell kits that allow houses to be built quickly, kind of with minimal waste. So you get everything you need to build a house. And usually what they have is like, you know, rustic looking kind of buildings, but they also have some kits that are based on Frank Lloyd Wright homes. So these are inspired by Wright. The architect who's done this is Aris Georges, a 59-year-old Wisconsin architect who studied at the Frank Lloyd Wright School of Architecture and taught there for decades. And he's worked with Lindal to create these beautiful, I mean, I have to show you these other pictures. These are gorgeous homes. Gorgeous homes that you can buy. They're relatively cheap, and you can build them on your property, and you can create this. Now, he's modernized Frank Lloyd Wright's homes because they need to be modernized. For example, Frank Lloyd Wright didn't leave space for televisions because there were no televisions, and when televisions were first introduced, they were tiny little things that were not that interesting. Certainly, there's no room in a Frank Lloyd Wright home for an 85-inch television screen. So you want to adjust. You want to build walls where you can put a television 85-inch. Frank Lloyd Wright kitchens are not exactly given modern kitchens and given what's possible with a modern kitchen. Frank Lloyd Wright homes are not designed for a modern kitchen. So what he's done is he's basically taken basic Frank Lloyd Wright designs, designed buildings that are very similar, but made them modern inside. I love this. If I had a plot of land, I think this is what I would do. I would hire somebody to do exactly this. Take an iconic Frank Lloyd Wright building and adapt it to a modern environment. Let me show you a couple of more pictures because they're really cool. Sorry, those of you who don't have not seen this on YouTube, but that's a beautiful home, and it's so inspiring. It would be fun to live in, and there's an aesthetic to it. It's not just a box. It's not just like the neighbor's home. Every single home is going to be different. This is so cool. I mean, this is what we need. Modern architecture does not suck. This is amazing architecture. This is much better than anything anybody's ever built in all of human history. I mean, look at that inside. I mean, you couldn't build this historically because you couldn't create glass like this. This is why modern architecture is far superior to anything in the past. I mean, this is beautiful. I'd love to live in a home like that. Right? Look at the light. Look how much light is coming in. Look at those windows at the top. What are they called? Skylights. They've got skylights on the top. They've got skylights on the side. You know, and he's got the sofa facing nature, perfect to contemplate the view. It's exactly the way my home is like. This is gorgeous. Let's see if there's any more. I guess this is the equipment. Here's some other, this is a home with a view. Again, you can see this is the inside. Look at that spacing. Look at those open ceilings, high ceiling. That's the other thing. Frank Lloyd Wright often had low ceilings. One of the things that's amazing is opening up the ceilings and raising that I would do to Frank Lloyd Wright homes if I could. Look at that. Look at that kitchen. That's just gorgeous. I don't know if you guys can see this. Whoops. Yeah, this is not translating as nicely, but yeah. Let's see if I can shrink this, if you can see it better that way. That, I mean, that I think is gorgeous. That corner, the windows, the little artsy thing. It's not really art, but it's decorative. This decorative feature that's very Frank Lloyd Wright-ish. That's gorgeous. Look at that's a backyard. Anyway, beautiful, inspiring, and you don't have to live in a box. You don't have to live in a home that every single one of your neighbors has exactly the same thing. You can actually, I guess these are not very expensive, and you can find a home, a home that inspired by Frank Lloyd Wright, and where you can get a kit to build it yourself or to have somebody build it for you that makes it fairly affordable. So yeah, no excuses, guys. No excuses. I love it. Love these beautiful modern open space flowing into nature. I could never live in a in a home that had the architecture of 100 years ago, 200 years ago. It would drive me crazy, with those big staircases or Greek pillars, or it's just so primitive, given what's possible, right? Given what's possible. All right. That is the news on this Wednesday, May 15th. Thanks for being with me. All right, we're going to go to the Super Chats. We've got quite a few Super Chat questions, which I will be happy to answer. And we'll do that. After that, we'll talk about trade. We are, let's see. Yeah, I did want to mention a few things. Reminders, I am doing a public speaking seminar the day after OCON. If you're interested, it's a workshop, a lot of one-on-one time. You can go to my website, yaronbrookshow.com, and there's a tab there for a workshop, and you can sign up for it. If you're interested in public speaking, if you're interested in a seminar for doing this, please consider it. You can also write to me at Yaron at yaronbrookshow.com. If you're just curious about it and you want any more information about it. Also on the website, let me just pull up the website now. You can also find a tab called Support Club. And if you click on the Support Club, you can sign up for commercial-free podcast, for the podcast with no ads. Again, a lot of you have complained over the years about the ads on the podcast. Well, now we have a solution. Please use the solution. I know many of you are listening on the podcast. You go to yaronbrookshow.com. It'll cost you $10 a month, and you can now listen to the podcast with no commercials. They will be uploaded every day, and you'll have access to them on this platform. Did it specially for you. Please utilize it. You know, so many of you have said, you gotta solve this problem. You gotta give us a solution. I have it. Use it. Use the solution. All right. If anybody's interested in coaching, business coaching, personal coaching, any kind of coaching, would like one-on-one time with me, I am now providing that service. You can best way is to email me, and we can discuss the details. Yaron at yaronbrookshow.com. Yaron at yaronbrookshow, and we can do any kind of coaching you would like, related to the philosophy, related to your ambitions in life, related to issues you have in business, applying objectivism, to the extent that I have something to add to your love life or whatever. Feel free to contact me, and we can arrange something and see if that works. If that works for you. Did I have anything else? Yeah, if anybody would like to sponsor a show, sponsor content of the show, it's $1,000, and you get to dictate the content of kind of the third hour of the show, or I could do it as a separate standalone show, but you get to dictate that content, so feel free to send me any topics that you would like to do. There's $1,000. There is a show coming up on money that will be part of that somebody is sponsoring. All right, I think I covered everything. I will say that, remind you that the Ayn Rand Institute, I think it's today and tomorrow, is holding a flash sale for OCON. And of course, the Ayn Rand Institute is a sponsor of the show, and you can go to AynRand.org/start here, and click on the OCON tab, and you will have access. There's a flash sale for OCON. I think it's a 20% sale. So please consider registering. It will be great to meet you. It'll be a lot of fun. You'll, again, be surrounded by an amazing group of people, and you'll have an opportunity to talk to a lot of amazing intellectuals who come and speak at OCON. So please join us for this, and by signing up today, tomorrow. But the flash sale, I think, is only 2 days, so now's the time to do it. All right. And then finally, Alex Epstein. Don't forget, alexepstein.substack.com. Best talking points about energy, environmentalism, and fossil fuel you will find anywhere. He'll answer every single one of your questions about this. Of course, read his book, Fossil Future, and you can also get the Alex AI, which is an AI that gives you answers based on being trained on Alex Epstein's content. Alex is great, so you should definitely do that. Oh, Cassandra is coming to OCON. I'll see you in OCON, Cassandra. That's excellent. All right, let's turn to your Super Chat questions. Hopefully, more questions to come. We're behind again. I'm starting to think. Well, we'll keep going with this format for another couple of weeks, I think, before I do, probably for the rest of May, and then I'll have to think about whether this format makes sense. Given, I don't know, it's lower participation, a little fewer people watching live, and I think less income. I think overall less income. So I'll have to rethink what we do and how we do it. We'll see. How do you create privacy with so many windows? Well, privacy from whom? The whole point is the windows face the backyard. The windows face the area. This is Frank Lloyd Wright home. The windows face away from where the public is. You don't put windows that big facing the street. So there's no point in blocking them with curtains, because then what's the point of having big windows if you're going to put curtains on there? But you certainly can have windows that you open some parts of the day and then you close using the curtains you close at other parts of the day. But why would you want to block it from your own backyard? Who are you trying to create privacy from? So I would say, don't put big windows to the front yard and make the backyard where the view is. And, second floor, nobody can look into your second floor. Put your bedroom on the second floor and have big windows. How are people going to look into that? I guess they could fly a drone, but then I would buy a miniature Iron Dome system that shoots down any drones that enter your property. All right, let's see. Let us start with Remo. Remo says, thoughts on the agency costs of free cash flow. Is it largely fixed in comparison to the 1970s, or is it still a big problem? All right, so we have to back up here because because I don't think most people know what agency costs are. So let's think about what so you have to first describe the agency problem. Here's the agency problem. Let's say I hire you to be my agent, to be my representative, and I pay you a salary, or I pay you by the hour. Either way, right? If I pay you a salary, well, the agency problem is you have an incentive to work as little as possible. Particularly if I'm a busy guy and I don't have time to monitor what you're doing. So I'm paying you a salary to represent me as my lawyer, or to represent me to run one of my companies, or to do something like that. I'm giving you a salary, but I don't have enough time to monitor everything you're doing, so you're going to slack off. And that is an agency problem. Right? I could pay you by the hour, but then you have a strong incentive to bill me lots of hours, to work many more hours than are required. Again, an agency problem. If I could monitor you, if I could supervise you all the time, that wouldn't be a problem. For example, in client-lawyer relationships, one way to mitigate that, is contingency fees. I'm not paying you. We'll share in whatever profits you get, right? Whatever settlement you can get, we'll share. And therefore, you work as efficiently, as effectively as possible, because that is your time is a cost to you, and you're trying to maximize the reward, which is in my interest. I want you to maximize my reward. If I pay you a salary, you have no interest in maximizing my reward. You're interested in maximizing your salary and doing as little work as possible. If I pay you by the hour, you're interested in maximizing the hours, but you're not interested in how much reward I get. Now, part of the things that mitigate all of this is competition between lawyers. I could hire a different lawyer. Part of what mitigates this is reputation. But a lot of times, reputations are false or can change again, and I don't have the time. So all of those are agency problems, and markets work pretty effectively to solve these problems. And one of the ways in which we express the problem, the agency problem, the fact that the agent's incentives are not aligned with the incentives of the principal. It's called the principal-agent problem. The incentives are not aligned. If you have a contingency fee arrangement, then the incentives are aligned, right? If you get a big payout, we both win. Little payout, we both lose. No payout, we both lose. So incentives are aligned. One of the biggest agency problems that exist is between shareholders who own a corporation and managers, the CEO, let's say, who run the corporation. The shareholders appoint a board of directors to represent them in monitoring the CEO, in making sure that the CEO is acting in the interests of shareholders. But they're not there all day. They're not monitoring everything that happens. Boards don't meet that often. And the reality is that if they pay the manager a salary, then he again has an incentive to work as little as possible and not to care that much about how profitable the company is. It has to be profitable enough so that he doesn't get fired. But there's no upside to him. If the company becomes unbelievably profitable, what does he get out of it? He's only getting a salary. And, you know, one of the problems with this is when a company is very profitable, what happens to all the cash that the company has? Now, we can talk a lot about agency problems. I could do easily a whole hour about this, and it's a fascinating topic. But Remo is asking about this issue of free cash flow. When a company is very profitable, it's generating a lot of cash. It's generating a lot of money. And the question is, what should it do with the money? Now, if a manager is just getting a salary, and there's a lot of cash sitting on the books, and the manager doesn't own any shares, then what incentive does the manager have? Well, the incentive the manager has is to hold on to the cash, because that minimizes the risk that the company goes bankrupt, which is the thing that worries him the most, because he will lose his job if it goes bankrupt. So having a nice cash cushion is great for a manager on a salary, right? Maybe it's not even that he puts it, that's one prospect. Now, what else could be done with the cash? The cash could be invested in projects. But there are two types of projects you can invest in. You can invest in projects that are going to maximize shareholder wealth, projects whose rate of return, expected rate of return, is higher than the expected rate of return on the stock of the company, and therefore adds value to the company. Those are rare, hard to find. It's why companies like Apple and others sit on a lot of cash they don't invest it, because they don't have anything to invest it in. They can't find things that will generate a higher rate of return for them than what they're already doing. Or you can invest it in lousy projects just to show the world that you're investing. Pretend that you're active, you're an engaged manager, you're a good manager, or you can sit on the cash. And a last alternative is you can give it back to shareholders. Not back, you can give it to shareholders. And you can give it to shareholders by two mechanisms. One is through dividends and one is through stock buybacks. And probably stock buybacks are better than dividends because capital gains are taxed at a low rate than dividends are taxed. And that's one of the reasons you have a lot of stock buybacks in the market today, is because companies are making a lot of money. They don't have a lot of good investment opportunities, so they want to give the money back to shareholders, which is good. It's exactly what they should be doing. And they do it through stock buybacks because that's what the tax system incentivizes them to do. Now, the problem is that if the manager is not a shareholder, he has an incentive to do things like make bad investments. By the time they discover that bad investments will be a long time from now. Or they will, they have an incentive to hold on to the cash. They have no real incentive to give it back to shareholders because they're not a shareholder. They don't get anything from it. And the less cash they have on the books, the more risky the company is, and therefore the more risky their job is. They have really no incentive, again, to invest in expected return, positive expected return investments, because the benefit of those is only long-term, and the shareholders benefit, and they themselves as managers don't. Again, a very narrow definition of self-interest, right? But kind of the cash, how much money they make, and whether they preserve the job or not. So they tend not to do the right thing. One way to solve this problem and a way that evolved during the 1980s is to solve this problem, is to make sure your CEO is a shareholder. One way to do that is to give them stock options. Another way to do that is to give them stock. Now, if they become shareholders, their incentive and the shareholder incentive is the same because they are shareholders. And you have to make it so that the shares are a significant amount of their wealth. That is, if they're making a huge amount of money in salary, so that the shares are not that significant, then you don't get what you're trying to achieve. If they're only getting a little bit of shares, indeed, the best thing to do is to force them, in order to take the job, to buy shares, to put money out of their existing net worth into the company, and that makes them committed, and that aligns their incentives with shareholders. Now, is that the case today if we eliminated agency costs? And I'd say the answer is no. Now, to the extent that we're seeing a lot of share buybacks, that's a good sign. That means managers are doing the right thing. But there's also seems to be a lot of cash on company balance sheets, and I'm not sure why there's a lot of cash. And there was a lot of cash when interest rates were very, very low. You'd think that when interest rates are low, they would buy back all the shares they could with all the cash that they have. And if an investment came out of nowhere that they wanted to make, they would borrow the money because interest rates are so low they can afford to do it. So I doubt that the agency cost is all gone. And a lot of the reason the agency cost has not gone is because of the backlash against stock options that happened during the financial crisis, I think, that really caused companies to stop compensating managers with stock options, which I think was one of the best things to align managers with shareholders and indeed encourage managers to take risk. Options, you give managers stock options when you want them to take risk. And shareholders should want managers to take on risk. Shareholders tend to be diversified, and they don't mind if any particular company takes on risk as long as it's not correlated with the risk that everybody else is taking on. So stock options were a magnificent tool for reducing agency costs, and basically through regulations and taxation and all kinds of other things, they don't exist anymore. So I think agency costs are less than they were in the 70s because a lot of managers today own shares, but higher than they were 15 years ago because stock options would be taken off the table. At least that is my estimate. All right, that was a long answer, Remo, but you did put $65 into the pot, so I appreciate that. All right, guys, stickers. Stickers are one way to support the show without asking a question. It's a way for us to at least get close to our goal or to move towards that goal. And if you value the show and you want to participate in the trade, please do that. Those of you who are listening, not live, please consider, again, show is made possible, contribution by you. Please consider making a contribution via Patreon or PayPal and doing it on a monthly basis, given that you're not here to do a sticker or to ask a question. All right, James, why do they want to control me and destroy my soul? To subdue their own inferiority complex? How are you so good at reading minds? Well, I'm not that good at reading minds. I listen to what people say, and I look at what their incentives are, and I look at what their actions reveal about what I think they think and about what their motivations are. But you cannot tell for any given individual what is actually driving them. All you can see is their actions, and their actions are clearly not only self-destructive, but they clearly, they want control. They're acting in a way that suggests they want control. What else could they want? When they are imposing more and more controls on you, and they celebrate the controls. So why do they want to control me? I don't know. That's a deeply psychological question, because they have an inferiority complex, because they have a power lust, because that is what whimsically they want, because they are self-destructive, because they're irrational. It's the bottom line. The bottom line is they're irrational. And part of that irrationality gets expressed by the fact that they want to control you. They will control your life. They will control what you do. They will control your decisions. They want to limit them. All right. Liam, did you always have a sense you were going to be famous? That's pretty funny. No, I never had a sense I was going to be famous, and I still don't have that sense. I'm not famous. Am I famous? There's nothing to suggest that I'm famous. I mean, I'm a minor celebrity, you might say, but famous is a lot more than what I am. So, no, I've never had that sense, and I don't really have it even now. Liam, do you ever look back on your debates and think I should have said this or that, or are they all a blur at this point? Well, at this point, they're all a blur, but certainly in the days after the debate, I always look back and say, I should have said this. I mean, that's how you learn, right? You think back on what you could have said, what you should have said, how you should have handled any particular point. Could you have done it better? Could you have done it differently? It's the only way to improve is to think about those things and to focus on those. I don't obsess about it. I don't get upset with myself about it. I used to more than I do today. I just go on. But I do think about it because that thinking is how you improve. I often, on a show, after a show, I said, oh, I shouldn't have answered that question that way. I should have done it differently. I shouldn't have made that point that way. I should have done it differently. That thinking is what makes it possible to get better at whatever it is that you do. And that's true of anything in life. You should always review what you're doing and think about, can I do it better? Think about, did I do the best that I could? And not beating yourself up by doing that, but doing it in a constructive way that suggests this is how I can learn. This is how I can get better at whatever it is that I'm doing. So in a productive, constructive, forward-looking way. So, and you should do that with every activity, every single activity you engage in. So yes. Jennifer, the Wright homes you showed are beautiful. Now, they're Wright-inspired homes. I don't think Frank Lloyd Wright actually designed these homes. They're inspired by his designs, but I think they capture his spirit. Do you also find any value in houses with curvy lines? We have some beautiful homes here on Grosse Ile that are less angular, but I like those too. Yeah, absolutely. I love homes that do creative things with curves. You know, one of Frank Lloyd Wright's most famous buildings that he built is the Guggenheim Museum in Manhattan, and the Guggenheim Museum is not I wouldn't go for the art, but it's got this beautiful spiral structure. So yes, I like curved homes. I like it when they do the curves and they can break the surface in different ways, so that it's not just monotone curved. But yeah, I mean, I like things where they do it different. They use materials properly. They use materials well, and where they break the surfaces. But curvature are beautiful. You can have curved windows, just gorgeous to have those kind of windows. Arches, it depends how they're used. They can often be used in a way that suggests kind of classic, more old architecture, but they can be used in a very modern, kind of beautiful way. But yeah, I think all of that. It really depends on how it's used. I think you can do anything in architecture in terms of the shape, and you can make it boring or you can make it interesting. And I think there are a lot of really, really good, beautiful, interesting homes out there. And I like a lot of the skyscrapers I liked are very curved, rounded out. Yeah, but I like a lot of kind of modern architecture, and I think actually architecture has gotten better over the last 40 years, as compared to the 60s. 60s were the worst, like 50s, 60s, 70s architecture. You can see buildings like that. They were the worst. They were the concrete, all glass or all concrete, monotonic, no structure really, just a blob. And if you go to cities, if you go to where architects, in a sense, are allowed to do their thing, like China, like Shanghai or Guangzhou or Hong Kong or other places, I mean, architecture is amazing. And then if you go, or even, I've seen pictures, I haven't been there and I never will be, but if you look at Dubai, architects will basically tell, do what you want. Here's a budget, and the budgets are high, and do what you want. And they create beautiful things. There's a lot of really, really, really talented architects out there, inspired by Frank Lloyd Wright, inspired by Howard Rourke. I think most of them read Fountainhead, and they do beautiful, beautiful stuff. So I'm not a critic at all of modern architecture. I think modern architecture is spectacular when you allow the architects to really have free reign in terms of their creativity. Thanks, Jennifer. Glad you enjoyed the photos. All right. James, reminder to everybody, want to ask a question? Not in the chat, put it in the super chat. Small contribution, it's easy to do, supports the show, supports what I'm doing. Trade, there's no downside. RDF, thank you for the sticker. Gail, thank you for the sticker. See, even $2. Enric, thank you for the sticker. Even $2, it's all great. Robert, thank you for the sticker a long time ago. And of course, John got it all started right at the beginning of the show. So yeah, please use the stickers to support the show. James, would you classify India as a Western country? As poor and mystical as it is, India doesn't appear as medieval and nihilistic as Islamic countries. Indian who come to the West do very well. I mean, I certainly think it's a country on the way that's mostly Western or to a large extent Western. But yeah, I mean, it is a country that is Western in many ways, in many respects. So, you know, do I consider it Western? Not completely, but on the way there, right? They got elections, they've got some semblance of a market economy, but they've also still got a caste system. They've also still got remnants of that. More so, let's say, than in Japan or in South Korea or in Taiwan. They've still got the remnants of their old civilization, of the bad culture. So it's a culture that's evolving towards being Western. Clark, are you sure obnoxiousness doesn't speed up the process? The left are totally united and obnoxious, and they run everything. Yeah, but I don't think they run everything because they're obnoxious. Indeed, I don't think they succeed because they're obnoxious. They succeed because they have the universities. They have they have the professors, and the professors are not obnoxious. The professors are teachers. They're teaching crap. They're teaching falsehood. They're teaching obnoxious material, but they're not teaching in obnoxious ways. But they're cultivating a generation of people, and the activists obnoxious, but and I don't know how much the activists have an impact long term. The real impact is not the activists. The real impact are the people who actually take these ideas more seriously than the activists, who go into the corporate world and apply them, who go and run HR departments and bring in DEI people. It's the professors, the intellectuals, the newspaper writers, those are the people, and they're not obnoxious. If you look at the writers who write on leftist publications like the New York Times, they're not obnoxious. They're obnoxious in terms of the bad ideas, but they're not obnoxious in terms of how they present. They present it in a reasoned, moderate kind of way. Their reasoning is not very solid, but they're presenting as if they're making a solid argument. I don't know where. I mean, it's true that the Nazis were obnoxious and they rallied people around them and they got a lot done. That's true. But it wasn't a lasting movement. I mean, the communists are obnoxious. It's true that the far radicals are all obnoxious, but do they really succeed in achieving their thing other than in, they get this blowout effect where there's a period in which everybody's enamored with them, but it doesn't last. The obnoxiousness, if we're going to change the world, we're going to change it by reasoning, by convincing people that they're wrong. I know it's hard and it takes a long time, but you got to reason with them. You got to use rationality. Otherwise, what do we stand for? And I don't know what being obnoxious gives to you. I'm not sure why, what the advantages of obnoxiousness is. Why is this coming up? Why is everybody suddenly talking about being obnoxious? Is somebody arguing that Yaron is not obnoxious enough and we should really, objectivism should be a more obnoxious philosophy in terms of the way it's presented to the world? Maybe. I know there was a guy who used to do that on YouTube, but he hasn't, I didn't think he was on YouTube, hasn't been on YouTube for a long time. All right, Cassandra says, see you at OCON, looking forward to playing poker with you. Yeah, that is going to be fun. Poker is one of the highlights of OCON. And you can't play poker with me unless you come to OCON. So use the flash sale going on right now to come to OCON. Am I good at this marketing stuff or what? Sales, not even marketing. This is sales. It's pure sales. Sign up for OCON. Come to OCON. All right, James. Why does the left have a monopoly on being humane and compassionate? Their policies rot out cities and make people fear and hate one another. Yeah, but you don't understand. Their intentions were good, and they really wanted to help people, and that was the reason they gave for everything that they did. And that was the driving force, and that was what they wanted, and that was motivation. And you're just being insensitive by calling on them based on the results. You're really being obnoxious, James. I'm kidding. God. People are measured by their intentions, not by the results of what they've done. And indeed, it's always the case that they never blame the failure on their intentions, on their policies, or on their philosophical motivation. They blame it on the capitalists in one way or another. They blame it on whatever element of freedom is left in the world. That's what gets blamed. And it works because everybody agrees with the left philosophically. This is the big failure of the right. They don't disagree with the left on philosophy. They agree with the left on philosophy. So when the left says it wasn't our fault, why would anybody disagree? We were just being good altruists. Yeah, no, the motivation was good. They really wanted a good thing. So yeah, the policies didn't work, but maybe next time. It's all about philosophy, not about particular policies. I like numbers. Bryan mentioned seeing Dr. Peikoff at age 18. I went back to find it, but it seems to be gone. Did it get edited? Yes, it got edited out, so don't look for it because it's not there anymore. And nothing Bryan said was bad. It was just wasn't a topic. I accidentally read that question. I had an intention of not even reading it. And it wasn't... I think he said things there that I disagree with, and in a different context, I would have expressed myself, but I didn't express myself. I didn't fully give the explanation. It comes off as too that I'm agreeing with him on stuff that he's saying, and when I really am not. And I think it gives the wrong impression to the listeners. I just took it out because I don't think it's that relevant. Michael. I know you guys love to delve into the intricacies of the inner workings of, gossipy aspects of the objectivist movement. But, I could do a show on it, but I'm not that interested in that. I'm interested in focusing on truth in the future. Happy to talk about David Kelly and all of that stuff if you guys want it, but not about any particular thing and anyway, I thought it was, I didn't have an opportunity. I mean, basically, I took it out because of what I didn't say, not because of what Bryan did say. Michael, I much prefer this show format, but I understand the revenue may be affected due to people's work schedules. Yeah, I think there has to be a significant number of people who used to do big contributions on the Superchat, 100, 250, things like that, 50, who are just, who probably prefer listening in the evening because of work and are just not showing up for these, and therefore the Super Chat is taking a hit. And that is a problem. As I've told you, I can't do these shows if they don't pay. So I'm going to have to, at some point, I'm going to give this a little bit of more of a chance to see. Maybe people will get used to it. Maybe people will join. But at some point, we'll have to make another change given given all of that. Yeah, I mean, the show can't survive if we're not ultimately meeting the targets, or at least not getting close to them. It's just, it's doesn't pay for the time. There are other things I could be doing. Fed Harper says, give this super chat 10 likes, and I will do a $10 super chat. Yeah, so just like the super chat. That's you guys. You guys have to go and like Fred Harper's super chat. And if 10 people like it, I guess he's playing with this like feature on the super chat. But it's got 15 likes. Did you do something? I don't see your 10. Oh, there it is. 10 likes acquired. 20 likes on this one, and I do a $20 sticker. All right. So so it's now at 16. So you keep track of it. I can't keep track of it. But if you guys want to support the show, you can do so by liking Fred Harper's, chat, super chat, whatever. It's too confusing. YouTube is confusing me. All right, I'm Meerkat. Hire the unemployed immigrants to build the great big beautiful wall for Trump. P.S. Gaza must be destroyed. I mean, it's the only way you can build that wall. It's not like you're going to find, legal residents of the United States to build a wall with. Yaron, I passed the bar exam in my province in Canada. Congratulations. That's terrific, Tubester 17. I plan on starting my own private practice. What's with this inflation? Thoughts? How much inflation caused by government, 90 or 95%? Well, I mean, if you count the Federal Reserve as part of the government, if you count central bank as part of the government, then 100%. 100% of inflation is caused by government, monetary and fiscal policy of government. So it's all government. And I talked about inflation before. Hopefully that answered your question. But it's all government created. There is no private, in the world in which we live today, there's no market created inflation. Certainly not that's sustained. Again, you could have a shock to supply, which lowers supply and raises the cost of the goods that survive. But then that fades once the shock goes away and supply ramps up. Shouldn't last. That's what they called it, transitory inflation. Turns out it wasn't that transitory. Henry, why don't hedge funds and retail traders short meme stocks when they're going up? What's the risk if you're willing to hold for a few months? Well, I mean, there are a lot of challenges with short selling. Short selling is very expensive. To short the stock, you have to hold it for a long time. You don't know how long these meme crazes can go. It might not be a few months. It might be a few years. And, the shorting requires you to borrow stock from somebody and sell it. And then when the person wants the stock back, you buy it back and you give it. Well, I mean, you might be forced out of that position before you have an opportunity to make any money. Also, your losses could be huge. You might be using leverage to do the short. And the thing with shorting a stock is you can lose an infinite amount. That is, there's no limit to how much you can lose on a short. As a consequence of that, your broker is going to look at that and say, wait a minute, how are you going to ever pay this back? You've lost so much money on it. I'm going to reduce your margin accounts, the amount of leverage you have in all your other accounts. So it really hampers your business. And it can take a long time, and you could lose a lot of money. I told the story of losing $1 million on a $200,000 investment. I mean, this takes real skill. In, what year was it? 1999. I had a short, and it wasn't my money, of course, it was my client's money. But I had a short on a bank called NetBank. It was the first internet bank. And it basically paid people a lot of money to give it deposits. And then it bought mortgage-backed securities, and it made 2% profit year in, year out. And it was trading something like 4 times more expensive than any other bank in the United States. It was by far the most expensive bank in the country. And as a consequence, my firm shorted it. And we had a short on it. And during April, 1 week in April 99, I actually have a journal article. If you look up the Journal of Investing, I have a journal article about this and the whole phenomena that happened. In April of 1999, the stock went up from like $40 a share to $250 a share in 2 days. This is the grandfather of meme stocks. And basically, for a $200,000 position, I lost $1 million. And my investor basically called me up and said, you can't hold on to this. What if you lose another million? Or how many millions can you lose of my money? He said, you can't do this. You have to sell out. You have to get out. Take the loss and get out. Which I did, and luckily we made more money on other things that year. We did fine. But it taught me a lesson. Shorting is super, super, super risky and dangerous, and you better be able to hold on for months. And you might never recoup it back. Now, NetBank, 2 years later, was at $2 a share, and 4 years later went bankrupt. It was $0 a share. So yes, if I'd held it for long enough, I would have made all the money back and much more. But who has the ability, if you're a short seller, to hold? Look at what happened in Melvin Capital in 2021. Now, what's his name? Carl Icahn supposedly shorted GameStop and other stocks at the peak and just hung on to them and made a lot of money as they declined. But if he had a short on the other day or Monday when they shot up, he would have lost a lot of money. A lot of money. And I'm not sure what he would have done. Would he have gotten out? Or is he going to stay in and see what happens? It's a very, very, very tricky thing to do. And this is why generally stock prices are far more likely to be overpriced than underpriced. Because if a stock is overpriced, it's hard to correct. You have to short it. If it's underpriced, it's easy to correct. You just have to buy it. So stock prices generally are more likely to be overpriced than underpriced. All right, Martin has the last Super Chat question for this round at least. Did you like the Capitalist Manifesto by Johan Norberg? Johan Norberg is currently writing a new book titled Peak Human: What We Can Learn from the Rise and Fall of the Golden Ages. Sounds like an interesting one. Yes, I did like, I think I've listened to most, if not all, of the Capitalist Manifesto. I think it's very good. I generally like Johan Norberg a lot. I mean, I know him. We're pretty friendly. He's really good. He's smart. He's articulate. And he writes well. And I think all of his books have been good. So I like the Romantic Manifesto. And yeah, what we can learn from Rise and Fall of Golden Ages, I'm sure is going to be terrific. Because I know Johan. He's he's a good thinker and he's right on these issues. So I'm looking forward to seeing that book. All right. Thank you. And thanks to all the super chatters. You can keep on doing stickers or asking questions. We're going to be talking a little bit here about trade. Let me just see. I had these. Given the fact that it's in the news and it really is everywhere, discussed pretty much everywhere, I thought it would be worthwhile just to do a kind of review of where we stand on trade, or where I stand on trade, and what I think about trade and international trade, but trade more broadly. And so we will be doing that for the next, half an hour or so. And then if you have any questions, I'll answer them. And if you don't, we'll call it a day. A day. All right. Let's see. Let me just remind you of how much we need to raise in order to get to our goal. All right. So I think we're all familiar with the basics of trade, right? I take my $100 to $1,000 and I go buy an iPhone, and I'm better off and Apple's better off. Trade is a beautiful thing. Trade is indeed how the division of labor manifests itself. The fact that we can each specialize and each do our own thing, and I don't have to make iPhones. I couldn't. The only reason iPhones exist is because there's a division of labor society and specialization and trade between employer and employees, trade between the customers and suppliers at every single level, and finally trade where I go and buy stuff. So trade is win, 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 win. There's just no losers from trade. Now, it's true, there is a sense in which if I buy an iPhone, I'm not buying an Android. And if you think about me not buying an Android, you think, well, they lost. Well, is that really the case? Is that really true? What did they lose? They lost, in quotation marks, something they never really had, me. They lost something they never had a right to, me. So nobody really loses, and even the company that, quote, lost is benefiting from existing in a system in which we rely on trade. And we do as little as possible to intervene in that trade, to restrict that trade, to limit that trade. We live under freedom, or at least some semblance of freedom. Everybody benefits from that. Even if, because I decide that I'm going to buy, I don't know, what's a good example of this? I decide I'm going to buy everybody decides they're going to buy Teslas. And Ford loses a lot of sales as a consequence. And maybe even Ford has to shrink and lay off a lot of workers. I would argue that long term, overall, those workers are still better off. Why are those workers still better off? Because they live in a place in which these kind of decisions are made not by a central planner, but are made because of the trade that's happening. Prices overall in the economy are going to go down because we can trade freely and make choices freely. And new opportunities to build and create are going to be created because of this kind of competitive trade environment. If I protect Ford, protect their jobs, well, I'm going to protect other companies as well. I'm going to protect other things as well. Cost of living for all those Ford employees goes up. But in addition, the more I protect Ford, the less competitive Ford becomes, the more likely it is that in the future, in spite of my protections, when they fail, they'll fail more dramatically, and they'll fail into an economy that is not free, that is not flexible, that is not cheap, that is not creating new jobs, and they will be really unemployed. So when the car industry destroys, if you will, the buggy industry, the people who lose their jobs in the buggy industry are not losers. Not if they think about the totality of their life. They are winners. And they need to find the next job, but that doesn't change the fact that they are winners. So trade is good. And leaving people free to trade with whomever they want is one of the most fundamental issues of liberty and freedom that there are. Who do you decide? Who do you decide? Who should decide what I should buy? Who I should buy it from? I mean, it's the same question as who should decide who my friend should be. Who should decide who I should marry? Who should decide what my job should be? Who should decide that? The fundamental question, the fundamental political question is who has a right to do that? And it has to be that only you can decide. Nobody has the right to decide it for you. Unless somehow your decision violates the rights of somebody else. And since other people don't have a right to a job, they don't have a right to a particular level of income, they don't have a right to a particular anything, the only way your decision could violate their rights is you doing something that imposes force on them. And I can only think of one example like that, right? And which we'll talk about a little later. So you have to recognize that my right to buy whatever the hell I want, whatever goods I want, whatever products I want, in other words, my right to interact with whomever I want, whenever I want it, wherever they happen to live, is fundamental to the whole concept of individual rights. It is what individual rights are about: the freedom to act based on my values, based on my judgment. And that means when I buy, I don't know, a Japanese car, I own a Lexus, my choice. I don't even know if it's made in, where it's made. Could be made in US, could be made in Mexico, could be made in Japan. I don't really care. I want a Lexus. And nobody has a right to stop me. Nobody has a right to say, to disincentivize me, quote, to use force on me, to tax my decision, to try to motivate me to do something different than what I want to do. I have a right to interact and to trade with whomever I want. When you restrict my ability to do that by barring it, by making it illegal, or by taxing it, you are violating my rights. A government that protects rights is a government that does not intervene in individual decision-making. This is why I'm for legalizing drugs. It's why I'm for legalizing a lot of things where individuals make decisions. They might be bad decisions. They might be horrible decisions. And I'm not trying to protect horrible decision-making. But the only way to protect legitimate, rational, good decision-making is to protect all decision-making. The last people in the world that you want to make a decision between what a good decision-making and what is bad decision-making is are the philosopher kings in Washington, D.C., the government making those decisions. Freedom also entails the freedom of people to make bad decisions. But when it comes to trade, most trade, we're not even talking about that. I want to buy, I don't know, I want to buy a lousy, cheap car from China. Why is that any of your business? It turns out that lousy, cheap car from China is subsidized by the Chinese government. Now, if I were Chinese, I'd be pretty ticked off at that. Why is the Chinese government using my tax money to subsidize a car that somebody in Puerto Rico is buying? Why am I, a Chinese citizen, Chinese taxpayer, subsidizing somebody who lives in Puerto Rico? That's ridiculous, the Chinese person would say. But me, in Puerto Rico, why would I care? And why is it any of my government's business? Why does Biden or Trump or anybody have an opinion about whether I should own a Chinese car or not? Now, of course, they have an opinion because they are lobby groups of workers, of industries, of putting pressure on them, demanding of them that they protect their jobs, their short-term, illegitimate, immoral interests by violating my rights. They have an interest only because we live in a mixed economy, which is an economy of gang warfare, of pressure groups, figuring out whose rights they want to violate when. And of course, this is happening not just in terms of international trade. It's happening internally. We subsidize farmers. Why would you subsidize farmers? Who needs farmers, right? Big farm conglomerates are quite good at producing food. Why are we subsidizing them? I mean, if the price of food goes up a little bit, but why are we violating some people's rights in order to preserve the interests of some small group? Because they have political power, because they have money, because they influence politicians. And everybody gets upset by cronyism. But barriers in international trade are the ultimate in cronyism. Ultimate in cronyism. So, trade without restriction is an individual right. Restricting my trade with people domestically and with anybody I want in the world is violating my individual right. My individual right as an American. Forget about the Chinese people. Me. And it is, I mean, I get the statists. I get why they do this. I get tariffs. I understand why tariffs are passed. I understand why they have trade restrictions. I understand why they subsidize, why they centrally plan. I get all that. But why anybody claiming to be an advocate of freedom, advocating for free markets, advocating for liberty, advocating for the founding fathers, whatever, how anybody like that would suggest that it's okay to restrict my liberty in this way, I don't understand. Now, granted, in the 19th century, the federal government was funded with tariffs. The founding fathers themselves imposed tariffs, which I think is very unfortunate. They had a limited understanding of economics, even though many of them read Adam Smith and they should have learned from him. They didn't. They still had elements of a mercantilist mentality. And U.S. economic growth was probably retarded a little bit by these tariffs. Now, that was in an environment where there were no other taxes, where there was a lot of freedom, so it didn't hurt as much as it does today when it's just one more tax. Right? So I think the number one point to understand here is tariffs, trade restrictions are violations of rights. Violations of rights. And really, at the base of that is the idea that only individuals trade. Individuals trade. I buy a car from Toyota, which was a company representing a bunch of individuals. Me and Toyota trade. U.S. and Japan didn't trade. Nobody from the U.S. government should have been in the process, and nobody from the Japanese government should have been in the process. I traded with a Japanese company. I gained. The Japanese company gained. Governments, nations, collectives don't trade. Only individuals do. corporations being, representative of a bunch of individuals. So trade is fundamentally something individuals do, not governments do. And it's something individuals do, and governments should have no interest in it, no business in it. It's none of the government's business. So, just from a moral perspective, there is no reason ever for tariffs, for trade restrictions, for trade barriers, with one exception. And that exception is where my trading with another country would violate your rights. Now, when would that happen? If another country is dedicated to the destruction of the United States, assuming we're all Americans here, then my trading with them helps them to get richer and come and destroy the United States. So if another country is unequivocally, clearly an enemy of the United States, then I should not be allowed to trade with them. But if another country is an enemy of the United States, categorically an enemy, wants to destroy the United States, taking action to do it, then we should not have an embassy there. We should not have any diplomatic relations. And we shouldn't have tariffs. We should just have a complete embargo on trade with them. That's, for example, what we have with North Korea. It's what we have with Iran. We've declared them enemy states. What we have, for some bizarre reason, with Cuba, even though Cuba is not an enemy state. We shouldn't have trade restrictions with Cuba. I wouldn't buy Cuban stuff. And this is the second point, right? There are a lot of people I don't want to trade with. A lot of people I wouldn't want to trade with. If I know a particular person is involved in a particular venture, I'm walking away. Not interested in having anything to do with some people. I don't like, there's some people I don't like. Some people I even hate. I don't want to be in business with them. I don't want to be trading with them. I'll walk away. But that's my choice. It is not a choice you can make for me. It is not a choice anybody should be allowed to make for another person. I get to choose who I interact with and who I don't, who I trade with, who I don't. So I would not trade with somebody in Cuba. I'm not interested in Cuban cigars. I'm not interested in anything manufactured in Cuba, because I know that pretty much every dollar that goes to Cuba goes to the government. There is no any even semblance of private property in Cuba. In Japan, I'm happy to trade. People in Japan are basically free. The money I send, money I use to buy stuff from the Japanese, basically goes to Japanese companies and Japanese individuals that are happy to trade with. I win, they win, everything's good. I'm, okay with buying stuff from China, generally. Only because China's this mixed case where I don't think every dollar that I send them goes to the government and therefore fuels their, oppression of their own people. I mean, I've been to China. I know that China, people become rich, individuals become rich. If you're a successful businessman, you do well. So there is a semblance of private property in China, so I'm willing to trade with Chinese people. In Cuba, all the money goes to the government. I'm not willing to trade with them. But if you want to trade with somebody in Cuba, I might say, you shouldn't do it. Not good. Don't do it. But I have no right to force you not to stop you from doing it. No right at all to use force in order to stop you from doing it. So that to me is kind of the only time you can have restrictions at a state level is when it's truly national security. Truly national security. And it's rare that something is truly national security. And when, and at the individual level, yeah, you get to make the choices of who you trade with and who you don't, who you find too obnoxious and who you don't. Somebody asked me somebody asked on the chat, why wouldn't you go to Dubai? I don't want to go to a country where men treat women the way Arabs in Dubai treat their women. I don't want to go to a country which treats its workers who come in from Pakistan and other places the way in the United Arab Emirates they treat their workers. I don't want to be in a country where you don't really have free speech and where, at least nominally, they are big-time advocates and funders of radical religionists who are very opposed to everything I believe in. I have no interest in going to Dubai. There's nothing about Dubai that I find interesting. Right? Now, when in Dubai, they adopt Western values, not just our architecture, but Western values. When there's more free speech and there's women feel free to walk around Dubai without any kind of head covering and without being harassed. When all of that happens, I'll be happy to go to Dubai. Until then, I'm just not interested. So that's me. Now, do I believe I should be able to stop you from going to Dubai? No. You should be able to go to Dubai if you want to. I might think it's wrong, it's bad, don't support them. But I don't get Israelis flooding to Dubai on vacation and stuff like that. It seems bizarre to me, particularly when you know what the people you're interacting with really think about you and really would like to do to you if they had the freedom to do so. I don't trust that culture yet. The fact that they're beautiful architecture, not enough. Not enough. Yeah, I mean, a bunch of places I wouldn't go today. I've been to a lot of these places. I've been to a lot of places that I won't. I've been to some places I won't go back. I'll never go back to Moscow. I'll probably never go back to Russia generally. I hope one day to be able to go back to Ukraine, but we'll see. And at this point, I'll probably never go back to China. And I'll never go, period, to Dubai. It's okay. Still plenty of places I want to go to that I don't mind going to. So anyway, that to me is the whole story about trade. It's a story of individual rights. Now you say, but what about trade deficits? They don't matter. I know there's a big literature now that says, oh, trade deficits, they don't matter. I have a trade deficit with my grocery store. I give them money, and they keep my money. I get goods, I keep the goods. But it's a massive trade deficit, right? Because all my money gets sucked into the grocery store. Because trade involves a trade deficit. Money gets exchanged for goods. And it all balances out on a global scale. So why do we care if at any given point in time, in any given particular country, there's a trade deficit or a trade surplus? And under capitalism, at least, if it was economically problematic, then it would be self-correcting. The fact that it doesn't correct is either a consequence of government intervention or a consequence of the fact that it's not a problem. And it's not a problem. The United States produces a lot of stuff that is not measured in trade deficits. For example, I'll give you one example, right? We import iPhones from China. And when they calculate how much of the iPhone, how much to charge kind of the account that is imports, they charge most of the cost of the iPhone, at least the cost of the iPhone. And so we have a trade deficit vis-a-vis China of, let's say, $600 for every iPhone. But that's bizarre. Because the reality is that China only adds about $4 to the price of every iPhone. Everything else in the value of the iPhone comes from other countries. And yet, And a lot of it comes from the United States. And yet but it comes as a service, right? The planning, the design, all of that comes from the US. And yet, all we measure is the price, the cost of the iPhone as a measure of the U.S. importing something from China, when it's really the U.S. importing something from 43 different other countries. And some of it, a big chunk of it's not even from other countries, it's from the United States itself. It all gets attributed to China because that was the last touch point. But that's silly. And there's so many things like that. All these numbers I really like that statement from the governor of Hong Kong in, I think it was the 1960s, and somebody came to him and says, why aren't you measuring your economy, GDP, employment, all these things? Why don't you measure it? Because there were no measures. The Hong Kong government did not release any measurements. And the governor said, because if I measure it, there will be somebody up top who will want to control it. And that's exactly right. I mean, in some extent, wouldn't it be better if we lived in a world in which there were no economic measures? Freedom works. It's all you need to know in that sense, right? You don't need economic measurement other than to use it in order to try to manipulate, which always makes everything worse, not better. You want to measure it, see how well you're doing, see how well your friends are doing. So trade is individual. Trade is win-win. Who cares if the United States makes any cause? I'll say that again. Who cares if the United States doesn't make any cause? How can you be an advocate for free market, claim to be an advocate of free market, as people were yesterday on the chat, and say America has to have an auto industry? By what standard? Auto industry is a value to whom and for what? And given the collectives don't have values, what are we talking about here? The job of the government is only to protect individual rights. How is the government protecting individual rights? By banning me from buying foreign cars and insisting I buy American cars. Whose individual rights are being protected? It's completely inconsistent with freedom, with liberty. Put aside the economics of it, which is stupid, really, really bad. So, I mean, I can understand saying, for defense purposes, we need to have certain capacities, all right? Let's define those very, very clearly. If war broke out tomorrow, what would we have to have right here in America? Given that war right now is probably probability of zero that it happens with Western Europe, Canada, Mexico. Okay, so how do we structure our supply chain to be safe? Okay, so let's mothball some steel plants and some chip plants and some, I don't know, whatever it is that we need. Let's make sure that we have enough bomb manufacturing capacity. And if we don't, let's make sure that the Canadians are able to supply us with steel, and the Mexicans can supply us with X, and the Europeans can supply us with Y. I mean, this idea of self-sufficiency is an idea of poverty. Poverty. So even from a national security perspective, you don't want everything to be in the United States. You want it to have a little bit of diversification among your allies, and you want to have allies. Allies are always good to have. But from an economic perspective, it's never right to claim that it has to be made in the United States. And all that's being done today with the central planning from D.C., the tariffs from D.C., the subsidies from D.C., all of that is anti-individual rights, anti-freedom, and anti-liberty. Any tariff on any good from any country in all circumstances is wrong, immoral, a violation of rights. There is literally no circumstances in which a tariff is justified even as compared to other taxes. I mean, a sales tax across everything you buy is wrong, shouldn't exist, but it might have to exist for a while as we transition to a purely laissez-faire. But a tariff has never, ever any justification. The founders were wrong to have tariffs in the 19th century. The U.S. economy would have done better without them. And anybody today advocating for them is advocating for violating rights. Just like if I advocated for increasing taxes, I'd be advocating for violating people's rights. Trade is not a sacrifice. Trade is win-win. And even if it's not, it's your responsibility as an individual to decide who to trade with and who not, what to trade and when. It's none of the government's business under any circumstances, except for the one I stated earlier. So, the people who claim to be for freedom and for tariffs are not for freedom. They don't understand what freedom is. They don't understand what individual rights are. They just don't understand. You wanna declare China an enemy of the United States? All right, do it, but then do it all out. That means no diplomatic relations, and that means an embargo. And maybe that's justified. For a different show, we can talk about that. But tariffs, by the way, not just on China, but on Mexico and on Canada and on Brazil and on Europe, never justified, even if God's gift to humanity, Donald Trump, proposes them. So many people who claim to be free market become stupid when it comes to tariffs and when it comes to Trump. All right. What else did I want to say about trade? All right. There's a new study out that shows that in spite of all the attempts, including by Trump, to bail out the steel industry, steel production in the United States is basically flat. Total cost of steel markups from 1990 to 2019 exceeded the value of all U.S. publicly traded steel firms. It's just the whole thing is a scam. It's a scam at your expense, at my expense, at American taxpayer expense. And again, it doesn't matter who proposes it. It doesn't matter if it's Trump or Biden or anybody else. Steel tariffs are a net loss to you and a net loss to the economy, whatever the hell that means. Productivity in steel is down. Every aspect of the steel industry in the United States is not good, and a big chunk of that is the fault of tariffs. And the consequence of that are mighty, because we raise the price of steel for everybody else who's using steel to build stuff. One of the reasons American auto companies might not be competitive is because they have to pay excess prices for steel because of steel tariffs, which are not from China, by the way. And then we bail them out when they get into trouble. So we subsidize cars and we tariff their input. It just is mind-boggling, economically stupid. All right, let's see what else I had here about trade. Yes, you remember Donald Trump, you might not remember this. Donald Trump imposed tariffs on washing machines built outside the United States. Again, not China, Korea, other places. Washing machines. Tariffs, so a new study, tariffs on washing machines cost Americans $820,000 per job created. $820,000 a year per job created. All consumers had to pay more to the benefit of a few thousand workers. Tariffs may be good, so tariffs might be good politics for to appease a particular gang, but they are bad economics and bad individual rights, bad for your freedom and bad for your pocketbook. Tariffs are bad. It doesn't matter on what. Again, these are, and you think that Donald Trump lowered your taxes? Raised your taxes significantly. I mean, Biden's tariffs from this morning, just absurdly ridiculous, unbelievably horrible. And, you know, the sad thing is that nobody's going to overturn them. If Donald Trump gets elected, he's going to double up on them. He's going to double them. He's going to want to be even a bigger tariff guy than Biden. Biden's a wimp. He only had 100% tariff. I want 200% tariff. He only had tariffs on EV. I want on everything. I mean, Trump wants a 10% across the board tariff on everything, which is basically a significant, not an insignificant, a significant tax increase on all of you. And if you listen to Robert Lightzinger, who was Trump's trade guy, right? He worked in a Trump administration, longtime trade negotiator going back all the way to Reagan years, become more and more statist every year. Now he's talking about the need for, this is unbelievable. He just gave an interview with the Wall Street Journal, and he's talking about what we need is trade balance. With every country, we need a trade balance. We only import if we export. For every dollar we import, we have to have a dollar export. Now, this is unbelievably economically ignorant. And maybe, I can't think of a more destructive economic policy that you could impose. He wants to do this by taxing imports to such a level that we stop importing. And he's got all kinds of ideas of creative ways to tax them, not just pure tariffs, so that Americans, so that we stop importing stuff. And then one of the things you have to do, because I explained this years ago, I explained this on one of my shows, that what happens when you impose tariffs, it actually doesn't reduce the deficit, and it didn't under Trump. The deficit never went down under Trump, because what happens is that currency rates adjust. Currency rates adjust in ways that offset the effect of the tax. So it doesn't change anything except Americans pay more taxes. But that doesn't change the net export-import ratio. One of these days, I'll explain it again. So what does he propose? He's basically proposing capital controls. Now, not only will we be restricted in what we can buy, when we can buy it, from who we can buy it. Now we'll be restricted on where we can invest, how much we can invest, how we can invest, in what currency we can invest, where we can move our money. We already can't, if you have a bank account in a foreign country, you have to, unbelievable. But that's what Leitzinger is suggesting, and he is the trade guru of the Trump administration. And I don't know if he's likely to be in a second term or not, but he certainly was the #1 trade guy. All right. From an economics perspective, purely economics perspective, I don't think there's a bigger issue. I don't think there's a bigger issue out there than trade. There's not a bigger issue in terms of if you wanted to help the American people really, really fast, lowering tariffs to zero would basically do it. And if you want to destroy the U.S. economy, fast and slow, raising tariffs dramatically will do it. Particularly if you add capital controls, that'll definitely do it. Anyway, that is what I had to say about trade. Let's see. Let's go to our super chat. Go to a few questions. Not many. Plenty of time for you guys to ask questions if you want. they want everything made in America. If there's a typo there. If they want everything made in America, why don't they have the balls to totally ban all imports? Do they know at some level what a disaster that would be? Yeah, of course they do. Of course they do. But you see, they are special human beings, and they know how to manage it just right to optimize it both for Americans and, for the economy as a whole. Some of them will just admit, if they're honest, that it's all about pressure groups and it's all about politics. I mean, what Biden just did is clearly all about pressure groups and politics. But he might be deluding himself, and there might be people around him deluding themselves that they know that we need a domestic electric vehicle industry, and given that the Chinese are so far ahead of us, this is the only way to save American jobs and American this and that. They can rationalize it away, but we can't do it in everything because it's not necessary in everything. In other things we can compete. Here we need a leg up. And we'll take the tariffs away once we get the leg up, which of course never happens. Never, ever happens. I want you to observe something, and you tell me if I'm, see if I'm right. This will be a multi-year kind of thing. If you can identify people today who are really upset by Biden's tariffs, who think this is ridiculous, what Biden is doing is destructive, it's very bad for the economy, it's a violation of rights, and it's no good. And yet, when Trump gets elected and he passes tariffs, they will suddenly be pro-tariffs. Now, I think you should take names, make lists now of the people who are kind of really upset at the Biden tariffs. And then when you will see that many of them, not all of them, many of them will suddenly be pro the tariffs once Trump gets into power. You saw this over and over and over again during Trump's first term. The things that if a Democrat would have done would have been horrific to people, just horrific. When Trump did it, he was playing 4G chess, and he knew exactly what he was doing, and it was the right thing to do. And this was over issue after issue after issue. It was stunning, stunning. And that's the sense in which people get, their mind goes dead, right? They get brain damage because of Trump. He makes them unthinking zombies. WCZN, thank you for the support. Really, really appreciate that. Jacob, you depressed me yesterday, but you are on fire. The modern day Paul Revere. We're losing our freedom. We're losing our freedom. You are appreciated. Thank you, Jacob. I appreciate that. I know we have our disagreements, so I appreciate it when you show support. Thank you. Ian Mirkat, is it okay to place trade sanctions on stuff like slave labor or other egregious human right violations? No. Don't buy it as an individual. It's not the government's job to protect slaves in other countries. Now, I think what would happen is you would get, and you have today probably, nonprofits that would come out and say, these are the products made by slave labor, and then we as individuals would choose not to buy them. And indeed, we could put pressure on importers not to import them. Well, by not buying them, they would stop. But we could also use guilt, use moral persuasion to tell corporations not to buy it, to tell importers not to import it, and so on. So there are lots of mechanisms by which you can stop the importation of slave labor goods without using government force. It's not the government's job. Your job is to figure out, domestically, again, you get to choose. There might be companies that you hate because they have the wrong politics, or because they advocate for the wrong things, or because they mistreat their labor in ways that you think are awful. You should not buy their stuff. but it's not the job of the government unless they're violating somebody's rights. And Mikot says, if you say Donald Trump in front of the mirror 3 times, Scott appears behind you and says, but the left. P.S. Gaza del Pada Este. I assume that's Moscow. Yeah, but it turns out that if you say it directly to the camera, it's even more effective. Donald Trump 3 times, there appears Scott. Yes. All right, everybody. Thank you. I appreciate the support. I will see you all tomorrow, same place, same time, 2 p.m. East Coast time for another show, news, and then a more in-depth topic to be determined. I will see you soon. Bye, everybody.